Good evening, everybody. You all may find your seats. Thank you, everybody, for making it out for tonight's program. We've got a very exciting one for you all today. For those of you unfamiliar with who I am, my name is George. I'm the programs manager here at the History Center, and I'm very glad to see everybody here tonight for our program. Just want to say a couple words before we get started here. This program, Indian Trail Marker Trees with Dennis Downs, is very generously sponsored by Lake Forest Open Lands as part of a citywide multi-organizational initiative titled Native Voices, where for the whole of 2023, we'll be exploring various themes having to do with Native American history in the local area. So we have institutions such as Lake Forest Open Lands, of course, Lake Forest Library, the Gordon Center, Lake Forest College, and a few others who will be participating in this initiative for the rest of 2023. So if you're interested in more programs having to do with Native American history, you can find more information at lfola.org/Native Voices, or just heading over to the Open Lands front page. You can find some more information there. This program, in partnership with the History Center, is one of 3 that we'll be doing through the end of March of this year. So we have another one coming up on February 8th, and we have the final one coming up on March 8th. So stay tuned for more information on both of those. You can register ahead of time for both of those programs at our main website, lflbhistory.org. Just want to say a couple more notes before we get started here. This program is being recorded, and everybody who registered ahead of time for this program will receive a copy of the recording around next week after it's exported. So if you know someone who wasn't able to make it out today, or you'd like to rewatch the program, you can do that from the History Center YouTube channel. And everyone here will get a recording if you sign up ahead of time. If you didn't sign up, let me know after the program. I'll make sure to put you down so you receive a recording. With that, I'd like to hand the mic over to Susie Hoffman for an introduction to Dennis Downs.
Thanks, George. Lake Forest Open Lands is proud to partner with the Lake Forest Lake Bluff History Center to present these 3 talks titled Indigenous Connections to the Land. And as George just said, this is our very first one, and we are so honored tonight to have Dennis Downs as our presenter. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about Dennis. He is an award-winning artist and author and North Chicago native. He's dedicated over 35 years to the research of Native American trail marker trees. His research has taken him to ancient sites throughout the Great Lakes region and beyond. His studies and lectures have created an interest in the trail marker trees throughout the country and have reached over 2 million people through his book, videos, and lectures. Dennis's work will now ensure that the history of the trail marker trees will be preserved and not forgotten. Next week, the Mitchell Museum of the American Indian in Evanston will be honoring Dennis with their most prestigious award for his exceptional contributions to the research and preservation of Native American histories and art. We're so thrilled to have you here tonight, Dennis. I heard him for the first time several years ago at Green Drinks in Libertyville, which was an incredible presentation, and this promises to be the same. So thanks, Dennis. It's all yours.
Hello, can you hear me? Yeah. I don't like microphones, I usually talk with my hands. So this is my wife, Gail Spring. Just a little background, Gail's been, we've been together going on 23 years. Gail has been nicely involved in my extensive travels throughout the Great Lakes and beyond a number of times, and probably speaks Indian trail marker tree as well as anyone, maybe with the exception of my assistant, whose entire life since she was 7 has been involved with me, and she's now going on 40. So I'm just happy to be here. Can I ask, out of the crowd, how many people actually have some understanding of what the trail trees were and what they meant? Okay, that's good. That's almost half. Has anyone ever seen a lecture other than Susan and Michael Green? Okay. I just wanted to know for background. I've got a connection to Lake Forest. I've been in and out of Lake Forest since I was a pup. If it wasn't for your Lake Forest tree, which is in that large poster there, coming in contact with me early on in my studies, I might never have gone as far as I did. When I found out that Dr. Raymond Jansen from Northwestern in the late 20s and early 30s, he was a botanist. He also worked at the Field Museum in the Indian section for 11 years. The man had a great knowledge of Native Americans and obviously of forest and fauna. He went to 13 states over a 10-year period. When I found that out, I was in my 30s, I decided I'd go everywhere that man went and then consider myself to know a little bit. That took 10 years. But anyway, we'll get on with the slide presentation.
I would just add that, so when I met Dennis like 23 years ago, all he can talk is trail marker trees. So I'm like, oh my gosh, someday, that he'll get over this. And then he wrote his book, which is, this next slide, but he wrote his book and I thought, okay, now he's got all these thoughts are actually down on paper and it's published. Yeah, after 28 years, he gets this done. So then I thought, okay, it's, it's documented, it's, like when you write everything down, it clears your head a little bit. Know that only increased and accelerated his trail marker tree work. So this is, I call it an irrational passion. When you have such a deep passion for something that is like, why does that, why
And
do
you
you
pay
have
for
it?
it.
Yeah, and so this is the story of Dennis's irrational passion on Native American trail marker trees.
I think, again, I couldn't be happier to be in Lake Forest. I'm going through, if I stop breathing a little bit, tomorrow morning I'll do my 82nd 3-day round of chemotherapy. So it affects me a little bit. I wasn't going to miss this unless I was on a stretcher. So this is just, obviously the book, Mayagabo is a name that was given to me by Ojibwa elders after extensively being scrutinized by them up in Michigan. One tribal chief tried to trick me by bringing me to a deformed tree in the forest and seeing what I would say about it. And I stood face to face with him and I told him, maybe you'll get other people to say this is a trail marker tree, but it won't be Dennis Downs. And he went, good. He was tricking me. Then he took me to an authentic one that he could prove was shaped by Native Americans, even to the extent now that I have photographs of the 2 Native Americans, Ben Scott and John Martin, full-blooded Ojibwa, who shaped the tree in Crystal Falls in 1930 as a request from Larson, who designed that park in Crystal Falls. So I like real research you can back up with fact. Not my grandma told me, not my grandpa told me. Photos, literature about it is wonderful. And actually, if you're lucky enough to play with real Native Americans, which I do, they'll open up to you and actually, now I have in my, since the book, photographs of Native Americans not 5 miles from here, leaning over a trail marker tree that's still alive on private property, and that's Dr. Raymond Jansen and Thundercloud, a direct descendant of Pontiac. And I've been working with his daughter for over a decade. So that's really important for our area, to have not nonsense, but actual factual data, photos, people with first and last names that were respected in their time. We're talking almost a century ago. Most of this research that I've uncovered, it might have taken 30 years to uncover it all, but now it's open and we have it in our possession. So I guess I'll have to do another book or upgrade the first one. For the people who don't understand the concept of the trail marker trees themselves, in our area, trees were obviously abundant. Trees got a lot larger than what people think they do, that we're seeing after logging, we're seeing after development. But the tree, this would be the trunk of the tree. This right here was actually the trunk when this was a sapling. It was bent over. Mother Nature will shoot buds 90 degrees straight up in the air. What you would do is simply walk by it, because you were either dedicating a new trail. These weren't for the main highways. A lot of people are confused about that. Everyone knew where the main routes were because these things were so worn into the ground and so old. They were thousands and thousands of years old. What these served as was more of an exit sign off of the main trail to bring you to things of necessity to the Native Americans. Things like chert deposits, copper deposits, where to cross a rock bed in a mud-laden river, portage routes between lakes, things that were serious and would add to making their life easier. We did skip a little bit about the fur trade, and we're privileged in this area to have a connection to the Native Americans going back to the late 1600s. We did not always have an animosity. There was a lot of intermarriage in this area between the Native Americans and the early settlers. They learned about these techniques through being involved in marriages through the tribes. So later, during the course of the fur trade, those individuals would make trails shaping the saplings in a direct route to where they could bring the furs to the ships. So that's why some of these trees are in areas that don't make sense to us now, but after putting all this together, it makes perfect sense. And there's actually plaques talking about this up in Michigan near Traverse City, going back over 100 years. This particular tree was in Deerfield, Illinois, by the way. I grew up between Wheeling and Northbrook in the 50s. So, if you have to think, Illinois was a massive swamp with intermittent groups and groves of trees. We were in an incredibly difficult state to get around it. In some of the older books, they actually say, you only travel in late August to go visit your relatives because then you wouldn't be caught in a quagmire. So you have to remember, you would want these things to mark paths around major swamps. One of the oldest 11 trees in the line that went from Highland Park, Illinois, all the way around what we refer to as the Skokie Lagoons. That was a massive swamp area. I think I'm sitting on the wrong side for this. So, did you want to say something? I don't know if I'm on the phone or not. When you're a hunter-gatherer, the other interesting thing about the bend of the trail marker trees, if you're bending the trees, the majority of the documented trail marker trees that are directional, there were a few other types. We're not discounting them, but this would be your major type of trail marker tree. And the reason they were bent this high, we don't get standing snowfall that goes over a foot or two that lasts for more than a week or two. So that would have to clear the snow line. The other thing is, when you're trained as a hunter, and I don't know how many of you actually have ever hunted deer or game, you don't look for a deer. If you do, you're going to really go hungry. What you look for is a tail, a part of an antler, part of a body section. So when you train yourself to look for a horizontal thing in a vertical world, your hunting improves dramatically. And once you learn about the trail marker trees and their shape, you'll view the forest differently. You'll be looking for these things automatically. And again, you were taught about these things from an early age. I would only have to take any one of you to an actual trail marker tree, explain it to you, let you see it, feel it, touch it, and understand it. You would never forget that until the day you died. And I've gone back and talked to people 40 years later that I took places, they can tell me where I took them to dinner during that research trip. It's a really bright, intelligent form of water and land navigation. Again, it would last 200-300 years minimum. There's oak trees in Illinois that people they perceive what's grown since we've been logged. That are, in Cairo, there's a 611-year-old burrow that's in the book. In Peoria, there's a 500-year-old white oak. These things are massive. The branches are so big you can walk onto the branch 60 feet away from the tree and walk up the branches to the trees. So, this is a simplified sketch I did for the book. Obviously, when you're bending the tree over initially, you can't remove the entire tree. It's got to get its nutrients, it's got to grow. But you'll start putting up the little buds. You remove them as you pass by. Again, you'd either be rarely marking a new trail, you'd be replacing one that maybe was in that area doing what you're going to do that was good for several hundred years and would still be usable. They were smart enough to replace these things, using what was naturally available in the area to them. We don't have big stones to do petroglyphs. We don't have monolithic stones to do the Inichuk system in the subarctic, where they use standing stones to do the exact same thing the trail marker trees. And this would be the end result. You finally simply remove the trunk, you leave it, you simply stake these with leather thongs, and I've done time trials, tested on how long will buckskin last in the wild, unprotected, and it'll go 10, 15 years, the strands. And the leather rocks to straighten the curve, which is another system used more towards Missouri, that bent the tree down and straightened it, again telling you that's done by the hand of man. Those buckskin bags with a boulder in them, I've got them that have gone 15 years, so it would last long enough to do what you're trying to do. And again, all these things were to tell you this tree was not accidentally formed by one tree falling on another. In that case, your trunk is gradually going down slowly. In a trail marker tree, there's a radical difference between the trunk and the upright, which is actually a branch. And this is one of my oldest trail marker trees, practice what you preach. I had older ones, they came to untimely ends due to storms and some new development. But that's Chief Thundercloud's daughter, Hilda Littlefawn Williams. She's a direct descendant of Chief Pontiac. Her father was a significant Native American in our area. He actually led the Thanksgiving Day parades in the 50s with Mayor Daley. Did a lot of reenactments, trying to keep this culture alive, and later you'll see photos of them. So this is what I was talking about earlier. I'm part Basque and part Irish. The Irish part is here, the Basque part is in Idaho. My mother was a mountain person, and she explained to me, Dennis, where we come from, we had these etchings on rocks, and it passed on information once you understood them. They weren't cartoons. We don't have that. They had the mountains also for observational, directional indications. We don't have that. There's people that are so out of touch with reality in the wild. I spent a great amount of time in the wilderness. We have cloud cover here 6 months out of the year. Using the stars to navigate, good luck with that. If you have a proper compass, good luck with that. That'd be difficult enough. And then I took it to the level of going into the upper Canada. The research took me to 41 states, 5 provinces, went through 3 Ford pickup trucks, doing 300,000 miles on each and every one of them, except the last one's not quite there yet. So their concept was the tribe would set up. This is one that was done in an artistic fashion in James Bay in Vancouver. But it's honoring the system in an artistic way. They were monoliths that went up, one here, and then a lentil, and the lentil on top. If the lentil was more to the right, the trail would veer to the right. And again, they're not trying to keep you on a narrow little path. What those things did was brought you between 2 mountain ranges where you're going to catch the elk or not the elk, but the caribou in their migration. You're going to go time yourself for the salmon runs. They're very important things. If you make the wrong move and pick the wrong passes to go through in those type of terrains, you might never be seen again. It's not a joke. So these things are incredibly similar to the trail marker trees. I've kept researching it, and it's incredibly similar. It was done by the tribe, taught to the young ones. There was a penalty of banishment if you touched them. That's how serious they were to the tribes. A lot of people will ask me, they go, well, how can you shape trees? The Native Americans have nothing on the Europeans for shaping trees, by the way. Furniture maker, boat part, people used to actually have farms that were nothing but a specific type of wood, whether it be white oak for the knees of a ship or whatever you were using for furniture in the old days. They would actually tie the trees over as saplings to get the degree of the curves. It's much simpler to use that piece of wood and much more natural looking than trying to put two pieces of wood together. So it's incredible. I've learned way more than I ever want to know about what people can do with trees. But it just shows you, and again, I have no experience as a gardener or a horticulturist or a professional arborist. If I could do this just by learning from my aunt inspiring me, she's Cherokee, and practice, and anyone could learn. And again, these were societies of the tribes. This I don't want to actually bore you with. This is just explaining, this had to be funded, and I knew that was going to be painful. I didn't want to side myself with any particular group, because when you do that, what happens is they supply the money and you start saying what they want you to say. So what I instead did, I'm obviously more well known for my artwork, my paintings and sculptures. And Lake Forest, again, had a great deal to do with that in the 90s and the early 2000s. There's probably more original paintings of mine in this area and Highland Park than anywhere else in the country. So what I would do is plan the research trips around my shows I would be in across the United States. In other words, if I'm researching one state with trail trees that I had enough information on, then I would do a show that was beyond that. I would take one route to get there, to go to ancient sites. Every state has probably 15 to 20 verified ancient sites. And my theory was there could possibly be trail marker trees leading to these sites. It would make sense. Didn't always pan out, but I usually learned something I didn't know by doing this. And I did that for the entire 28 years before writing the book. So there was a method to my madness, and I didn't have to lie. A lot of the older Native Americans I know finally, about 10 years, started asking me, well, why did you finally start talking to me? And they said, you're the boy who always told the same story. And they appreciated that, not making things up to sell coffee cups. That wasn't the point. My point was to preserve a really unique part of Native American history that was slipping out of common knowledge, and to honor the people that came before me. In my book, I credit 148 people in the first 2 pages that had anything to do with helping me along the journey. These are just examples of, actually, these were in Lake Forest, this is a family. I'm sure you're all familiar with Navy Pier. In Streeterville, I did the sculpture of Captain George Wellington Streeter. This is a Colorado-based winter scene up in Vail. Sorry. I used to do 10-day shows in Vail back in the 90s and in the 2000s. And this, I was very happy to have some of my Native American influenced work. Amy Ander, who's right in your area, one of the most well-known fine art show organizer companies in the Midwest period, highly respected. She started a show called the Festival of the Masters in 2007, I believe. was the first one. So in other words, to be in that show, you had to have one fine art shows in your category even to apply. So we had over 140 people from all over the country. We met at the Rialto Theater in Joliet, and I was walking out of the awards banquet thinking all the awards had been given out, but the last one for Best of Show hadn't, and I almost missed getting my award because some guys I was sitting with yelled, "Hey, Downs," they just called your name. So very happy to do that. And my first ever fine arts show on a high level was here in Lake Forest. It was the Gala of the Arts. Franklin McMahon was in it. Andre, who did the Michael Jordan sculpture, was in it. And that was my first, what I considered a high-level fine art show. And I was pleased to win that, the highest award for that show, and the Purchase Award. So I do have a tie to the community. These are a recent piece honoring the family. It's a mare and a colt. My family goes back with horses in the old days, and my assistant is a hunter-jumper. But it's more just a nice piece, just reflecting family. It's two sculptures, but it's one piece. This is what I was talking about a little earlier to you. So your Highland Park tree, and Mike Green is here. Mike, raise your hand. I'm blind. Oh, there you are. I've been staring at you. Sorry. Mike Green, when I first met my wife, she was a national level curler. So is Mike, and obviously the Exmoor Country Club has a lot to do with the curling world. So I was hardly knew Gail. I knew she was going to be curling. I knew that there were trees supposedly that were at the Exmoor grounds in the old days. Well, I didn't even make it in the door. It's snowing out like crazy. I don't know Mike at all. And he just pops up in the doorway and goes, "You're the boy in the paper all the time about the trail marker trees." And I'm like, "Yes, sir." And he goes, "Follow me." And he just walks away out the back to where the boulder to this day is still in the ground, where the old, was that the Caddy Shack or the Caddy Shack? Pro Shop. And it's a big boulder with a bronze plaque in it from 1935, honoring the fact that right here was the trail marker tree. So the one I'm talking about, that's the actual tree. Notice the similarity to your tree, and the plaque is right here to this day. The tree obviously is gone. That was interesting enough. But after the book came out, and that was one of my goals, to get the book out across the country, and then have other people have it trigger memories of theirs, and have them get information back to me again. And that happened. This is actually Chief Thundercloud in 1941 sitting on the Exmoor Country Club tree. I mean, how much cooler could that be? And the other thing is, Dr. Raymond Jansen, who I said was a big inspiration for me picking up this torch. This is Dr. Jansen with Thundercloud behind the Exmoor where there was the Potawatomi village they were investigating in. That same day, those two went to 13 different trail marker trees, ranging from Lake Forest all the way to one of the portage trees at the Grove, the national landmark and property in Glenview, the Kennecott, ancient 1800s Kennecott estate. Again, I really like things that are in writing. I like things that are from people in the world that would relate to trees. And I heard a rumor about a tree being in some plat books, and I went to the I think it's the Waukegan County Building where the plats are, and poured over them until we actually came upon this 1852. And by the way, what the property they're talking about is now where I live in the Channel Lakes region. I live on Channel Lake, the last lake. This tree marked the land bridge between Catherine and Channel. It was a narrow strip of land. If it was flood season, which was all year, there was no such thing as ditches specially made and underground tile systems to erase our flood in the old days. Everything went underwater most of the time, all of the time. So what this did was on one side of the land, on the north side of the lakes, it pointed towards the other tree, its matched cousin. If you kept that tree in the back of you and that tree in the front of you, it kept you on a course that was hard ground. I mean, what an advantage. Otherwise, the walk around those lakes, it'd be a long time. And to have it come up in a survey and say from one of the important, first of all, it's done by Hale, the Lake County Surveyor. That's important enough. And to do a sketch of the tree is important. But to actually have it recorded, and they're talking about sorry, I'm having a chemo moment with his name. I believe it was Gage that owned the property. And he was reputedly a very intelligent man. Later in his life, he became a judge in our area. So those things to me are, I just don't know if I missed something on that. I'm doing a lot of work in Iowa on some famous sites that have been written up in their states' magazines. But again, finding references to the trail marker trees going back to the 1800s is incredibly important. This is a quote from the Annals of Iowa. This is their yearly book. And what this is referring to is they are comparing the development of their children the way you would develop a trail marker tree. And if you shape it properly when it's young, it will serve a significant purpose for its entire life. When you use a quote about something, that quote has to be common knowledge to the area that you're using it in. So in other words, usually quotes have to be around 40, 50 years minimum before it would even make sense to put it in a book. So that's how long they've known the importance of the trail marker trees in that state. And I've had the pleasure of going back and discovering some that aren't common knowledge, and I've taken several elders back, gotten their opinions on them, and we're going to release that information to their tribal headquarters up there near Des Moines, hopefully in the next year, with Andrew Johnson, the head of the Native American Chamber of Commerce of Illinois, that I've worked with going on 2 decades. Again, it's important to have documented references. It's not hocus pocus. It's not my mommy told me, my daddy told me. It's fact. And that really honors the Native Americans. I've had Native Americans in my audience that have actually cried because they couldn't know about this research because they were relocated. How are you going to know about the trail marker trees that were here when your people and your immediate mother, grandfather, and great-grandfather didn't even grow up here? It would be impossible. So they're very happy about bringing this up. And this should impact your personal area, obviously. And this is the result of Ainsley Wunderling is a historian, for the Lakes Region Historical Society. She has dedicated her life to history of Lake County in general, but especially the chain. Because of me pestering her to death about a lot of information about the trees over the years, she was at a slide presentation and she spotted the trail marker tree that the cavalry officers are standing in front of. That was actually on the grounds of the fort. And that was the only tree they left standing when they cleared the parade ground. And if you don't think that our cavalry people, they would know about the trail marker trees from the scouts. The Indian scouts would pass that knowledge on to them. They might not be used for the same purpose, but think of it this way. When you see something like that, it's an immediate landmark to you. You know that if the tree's pointing this way, you know that Grandpa's house is that way. The river is that way. Grandma's is this way. All you need to see is that tree. And that's comparable to a permanent land compass. So these things would be advantageous constantly for you to have in your wheelhouse of knowledge. And how cool is it to have a photo, that came forward from that. And this is really why I'm excited about being here. Probably probably sounds odd to you guys, but Lake Forest had a big part in me continuing my study. I got to the point where I wasn't getting anywhere other than things I'd seen personally, because I was taken to these trees. My mother was a grandmother. I said earlier, my aunt, Little Bill Perry-Ochoa, was Cherokee. She ignited my interest in our Native Americans here. She said, quit worrying about the things in Idaho. She goes, this was considered by a lot of the Native Americans to be paradise. We have the flyway for the migration of the birds. We have turtles. We have fish. We have shellfish in all of our rivers in the old days, as many as you could gather. We have the deer population. We used to have the elk population. The trees were so enormous, they wouldn't take the trees down to build their shelters. They would ring the bark at about 10 feet with their stone tools and then crack it. And they would get planks that were about anywhere from a foot to a foot and a half with a very slight curve because the trees were so huge. And that's thick on a tree like that. And that's what they would protect their shelters with, and then laden that with buffalo skins. They could wear a t-shirt and sit by the fire in the dead of winter. They were not sitting in little teepees shivering. But again, getting back to facts. So I think you can see in this picture that these trees are very tiny and very in the distance. This is, I believe, was 1934. And this is Dr. Jansen actually standing by your Lake Forest tree, which, again, to me is priceless to have the actual scientist that was extremely well known about his study. He was published in 4 major magazines. He obviously worked with Northwestern. And there are other individuals here. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with Jensen, landscape architect, famous landscape architect from our region, probably one of the most famous ones. Now, when I found out that in 1911, he gave the first formal speech on the use and the shaping of the trail marker trees. Again, credible people. He was a forester. He came from a family of foresters. And to have that, and that was sponsored by the DAR, Daughters of the American Revolution group, here on the North Shore. Now there's a lot of different chapters. The first one, I believe, was the Fort Dearborn chapter. And they sponsored that. This is one of the first plaques that went up. And this is a different type of tree. We actually have a photo with best done on a trail marker tree back there that's similar to this one. What they did with this would be the tree. So these would be mature trees. And if they needed to mark something in an area where, say they weren't that familiar with it, or they wanted maybe 8 of the other braves were coming along later, what they would do is they would simply take a smaller branch, hit right to the end of it, and with buckskin attach that to a heavy stone. And that would make that branch literally lay across alongside the trunk. And as it would grow, and again, this has been tested, Mother Nature will shoot a bud within a year or two straight up at a 90-degree angle. It's not the traditional trail marker tree. References for it were they were shaped in necessity. In other words, not planned for references that maybe they would even use again, but they obviously continue to grow once they're shaped. Best done in that photo. Your Lake County Museum is now named after her. She did a photographic study, and I credit her in my book for doing that. Photography was just coming into vogue. She did a lot for the History Museum of Lake County. And again, this came out much later, probably 20 years into my work. And I think, can all of you read that? We are very lucky in reference to this particular part of Native American history, in that the late 1800s, and I've done talks for the Federal Survey System down at the Newberry. We actually had the best attendance for a small event at 7 degrees below zero on a Thursday night. And the place was jammed, and they had, it was just a really good event. But they're aware of the system to a greater degree than, say, the average, layperson. So the reason that DAR got involved so heavily with this early on and basically helped save this part of history, it's because a call went out in the late 1800s from the survey system. And what they were looking for was organized groups that could record old Indian trails. In other words, ones that were becoming marginalized, from housing developments, city planning. And they wanted these groups to go out and make records of these old trails in whatever township. The DAR has 3,000 chapters now. I'm sure in the 1800s it was probably just a few hundred. But they were dedicated people that did good projects for our country. When they started researching the foot trails, what they were doing was they took it to the extent where they were interviewing the farmers, and the farmers' parents, if that was possible, the oldest people they could get their hands on. And they kept coming across the trail marker trees. Then they started interviewing the people about that. And we're so lucky in this area that our knowledge was passed directly from the Native Americans to the pioneers about the trail marker trees. And there's very few places in the country that can say that. And then follow it up with actual plaques. Ceremonies. The largest ceremony held by the DAR in Glencoe in 1928 was over 100 people. That might not sound a lot to you now, but an organized event, and that was Native Americans, Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, historians, Raymond Jansen, Anna Ickes was the head regent for the local DAR chapter. She housed the Native Americans that performed the ceremonies. I even got the minutes about the ceremony. That took a long time. They're a very protective group. They want to make sure you're doing things that are good and honest. So to put that all together, I'm giving it 20 years. But now it's unarguable, it's fact, and because of the book, we have pictures of the natives at the trees they talk about, which is really nice for our area. This is one they saved. Well, there is the directional tree, which is definitely the most common. That would be your most common tree shaped by them. Then there's double trunk, which a lot of times we're indicating additional information, separations of trails, or river crossings. The triple trunk has always been in passed down oral tradition. That would indicate you were in the area of where the tribe would be located, or a major hunting area would be located. Wouldn't tell you, this is it, stand here and hunt. You've arrived. You got to remember, you're walking on foot. You're maybe going from Danville, Illinois to Lake Forest for whatever reason to hunt. That's a long trip on foot. This isn't a Western. They didn't all have horses. That's television. Well, what they did was save this tree to the point where they moved it to another location and actually petrified it, and it served even further, I think until the late 50s, when they finally fell apart, but it served as another educational tool. Again, keeping this concept alive in our area of the country, especially Lake and Cook County. This is what some people took the trail trees to an extent of. They actually, for an anniversary for back in 1947, they made the traditional streets that were in place then, the current, up-to-date thing, and they superimposed it over different, obviously, Anton Comet's house, the big tree, which is the Potawatomi tree. I don't know how many are familiar with the term, the Potawatomi tree in Lake County. Yeah? Okay. It was a 600-year-old cottonwood. The bottom of it, first of all, there wasn't a branch for the first 45 feet. People came over from Europe to document it. It was the largest tree east of the Mississippi. And it was our tree. It's also referred to as the Blackhawk tree. We know for a fact Blackhawk had meetings with his people at it. Obviously something that easily spotted an enormous, when the word went out, we're meeting at the whatever you want to call it. I'm sure they didn't call it the Potawatomi tree. That would be ridiculous for them to do. That's what we called it. And they wouldn't call it the Blackhawk tree because he only used it for meetings for maybe not even a decade, if that. But in that, just go back to that just a little bit. So also in this was the greenwood tree. Okay, this is the famous Comer tree in Kenilworth that was documented. Indian ceremonies took place at it. Above that was the greenwood tree. The double trunk paintings have been done of that. It's historically recognized. And this was one of the other trail marker trees. I believe that was by Canterbury. So they included it. So that's how much this meant to people. This was not something that, this was common knowledge to the communities in those days. And this is what I'm talking about as far as that first extremely important and large gathering honoring the Native Americans in our area. You can clearly see Chief Evergreen, who came down from what we would call the Dells area now, the two Ho-Chunk elders, Anna Icky and some of the other regents put them up. They were treated with respect. You can see the Boy Scouts. And again, this is just a snapshot. There were 100 people in this. And Glody, who did the Indian Boundary Park, now if you're familiar with that, that was the separation in the old days of the city and the wilderness. Richard Glody was a trail marker tree advocate. Again, he was in the landscape business. He was a landscape architect. He wrote to, I believe it was Abrams and Glencoe, the general, and sent a letter, a formal letter on his letterhead saying we have to do something about these trail marker trees before they're gone. And unfortunately, he died in 1941. Anna Ickes, the biggest advocate of the trail marker tree, she died in 43 in a horrible car accident. Her son was going to pick up the torch. He committed suicide because he was devastated over Anna's death. Raymond Jansen, the famous scientist, great for Raymond, bad for us, got a job at Marshall University, I believe it's in West Virginia, and they wanted him to take over the geological department. He did, and went on to improve it to a scale beyond their wildest dreams and had a wonderful life. But again, never came back to complete his study here with us. So that kind of deadened the study. I think you can all relate to that. You have three of your major players in the area all of a sudden within a 4 or 5 year period, gone. And then World War II. We had other things to worry about than the trail marker trees. But this is what makes me get up in the morning. This is the same tree that you just saw in that gathering. And now, because I acquired all of Glody's slides, his relatives did not, I guess, want to keep everything he did, so they were at a state auction. My assistant found out about it. I was on a project working with Native Americans in Canada at the time, and I told my assistant, I said, you keep bidding until we own all those slides. And it wasn't as painful as I thought it would be, but then to look through, I taught you thousands of glass slides, these gigantic negatives, they're really cool. But it was roses and bushes, landscape project, roses and bushes, bushes and bushes. And then boom, I've got the chief doing a blessing with the arrows and the tobacco bubble standing on the trail marker tree. That was on the border of Glencoe, Illinois, right here. So to me, that's pretty significant. And this is it standing next to the plaque on the left. The Waukegan chapter, which is right down the road from you, also had a great deal to do with saving this. They were involved early on. Obviously, that was one of the fort areas. Then further on, you had Fort Howard. And the other direction, you had our Fort Dearborn. They picked up the ball and again involved local Native Americans. This tree, this is me underneath it, probably 20 years ago. They've honored the tree. It's near the Shiloh Park. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that, where there was said to be an actual council circle of living trees back in the day. That's why they have their powwows there every year. And I was taught this information by Kanonazo, the Potawatomi historical expert for the Prairie Band of the Potawatomi. So this, again, this tree is at the border of your village. And I always knew it existed. I could never find it. I had the address, basically. I didn't realize that the size of the lots became a lot smaller as real estate went up in value. So the tree never died. The area and the estate was divided, so it's actually on a different road with a different address now. So when I went to the original address, I'm like, it's gone, and that's sad. But no, it's alive. So I knew it was alive. And when I started working with Little Fawn Williams, the direct descendant of Chief Pontiac, Thundercloud's daughter, I tricked her. I said, I'm going to take you and meet the mayor of Antioch. We're doing a project up there in Bronx on Main Street. And I want to introduce you to some other people in Lake County that I think you should know. So I said, dress up a little, we'll make a day of it. And I parked the truck illegally, put the flashers on, and walked her up to the tree that her dad was at with Dr. Raymond Jansen. Again, these are new photos since the book. I talk about these trees and knew the stories, but I couldn't prove they were actually there. And now we can, which is really significant. So, and she started crying. That was it. I stood where Doc Jansen stood, and she stood where her dad stood. And by the way, they're looking at a map of the other 13 trees they were going to see in their meeting. This is another type of tree. It was verified by the Milwaukee Museum, obviously marking a significant trail. And again, it's just nice to have, this is a photo, that's deteriorated, obviously, the plaque, but to have a photo of the plaque that stood there, and the tree unfortunately has gone. But this came out in a random, there's an old saying, the harder you try, the luckier you get. And a lot of times my research has come to me because I've badgered some poor professor for a long time, and they'll come across the file. So the file for our Wisconsin tree, not far from here, actually came from Victor Lemur's own personal study of the trail marker trees, and he's in Michigan. So it was by accident, and then I did further research on it. With Ann McMullen, who I got to work with for a little bit over a decade in the 90s. And she's now the curator at the Smithsonian in New York. So, and she helped me and taught me other things about Native Americans back in the day. So for me, that was important. This is another tree further up north in Oconto. I was told about the tree being in existence. I saw a photograph of it, but in the photograph, it only had 2 uprights. There were no other branches. And it indicated a spring. Like I said, a lot of times the double trunks were more informational than directional. I searched for it on several trips. They had a photograph of it in the Copper Culture Museum there in Oconto. But again, the photo was, I think even at the time, was 100 years old. So I was going to give up on the 3rd trip, and then I decided an old trick I would do is talk to well drillers. Well drillers, and especially if you can get a hold of their grandfather, that's still able to speak, they always knew where the springs were in whatever area they worked at. And they had, a lot of them had a lot of knowledge about Native Americans. And I was made aware of that in Antioch. So just for the heck of it, I got the phone book and called some of the well drillers. And one of them I got a hold with, he goes, "Boy, you can't see the tree because it's behind a building." And I was like, "Yes, sir, where?" You know, and he told me, and sure enough, we found the tree. And all of these branches are what we refer to as sucker branches. And their age and diameter almost matches the time period from when it was taken care of and groomed to where the building had been built and it was hidden and taken out of common knowledge. A lot of people probably just thought it was gone. So this is what it looked, over there is what it would have looked like. And without the sucker branches, Mother Nature will try sometimes to put new branches out. All you do is flip them off with your finger every other year, because you'd probably be using that trail at least every decade.
I would just like to step in one moment
Am I
because
going way long?
Dennis has a story about every tree, and he can talk very, very long. We still have a lot more slides.
Guilty. I'll try to speed it up.
So we'd like to show you some different examples from around the
Does it
country.
remind you of green
Canada, so you can see that these trees do exist in all different places and they look very similar. So we will speed it up a little because it's almost 8, Dennis. Just
Okay, sorry about that. I won't be offended if you want to leave, and I won't be offended if you want to stay, because I can talk probably for 3 days straight. With no straight. So anyway, like Gail said, this is in Arkansas, and again, it's nice when you can work with local Native American historians, and local Native American that was well respected in the area, and that's Glenn Jones. He took me to sites that had, there were 8 trail marker trees in Benton County. So I got to work with them. And again, this is Michigan. This tree, you'll see later. I gave talks at that tree, lectures, brought Native Americans there, researched that this tree was appearing in the Eagle newspaper in their community as far back as 103 years ago. So that tree was already mature. The nonsense that the trees are too small to be that old, when you shape the trees, you're asking a branch to feed the tree. You don't have 8 branches feeding the tree. And the reduction of the shape impedes the growth. I know that as a fact because I've done tests on growing them in a controlled environment with 8 trees of the same species, same size. I shape one after 25 years. Mine will be that big in diameter. The other ones will be 4 or 5 inches larger in diameter. So it's not he said, she said, it's fact that when you alter them, they're smaller and they're older than they appear to be. Is that fast enough? This is the result of doing those talks. I was able to work with the Chippewa, Ottawa, up there. They asked me to do the writing for the plaque that signifies the tree. There used to be a very bad fence around the tree. And at my last lecture before this ceremony took place, I said it would be very nice if we could upgrade the fence around the tree to protect it, but put a gate on it so that when older and Native American elders are here, they can put their hands on it during ceremonies. And it'd be nice to have a plaque. Well, they actually, the local band of Traverse City, the Ottawa and Chippewa, really liked what it was doing for their people. They funded the boulder, the plaque. I wrote the inscription and got to actually be there for the unveiling of all this. So a really nice crowd of both Native Americans and the local historians. This, I might have talked about a little bit earlier, the tree that was shaped in the 1930s. Again, I got to work with 2 full-blooded Ojibwe up in Crystal Falls. He tricked me on one tree, and it was nothing but a misformed tree. And if I hadn't made this clear, I should have said this in the beginning of the speech, every bent tree in the forest is not a trail marker tree. And please do not dishonor an incredible form of land and water navigation that was extremely clever and resourceful and long-lasting. Too many people are disrespecting the entire concept by just saying every tree that's deformed by lightning or a tree leaning on it is a trail tree. It's not. But those are actual photos of Ben Scott and John Martin that came forward, again, after the book. So now when we do a revised version, we can include these things. This is a different form. I don't know if you guys are familiar with beech trees at all. When you carve into a beech tree, and they're long living, it retains what you carve, and it grows with the tree as it grows. So what they would do in certain cases up there, this is a snapping turtle, and the tail is the indicator of what your direction is. Similar to the effigy mounds in Illinois and Wisconsin. We have more effigy mounds in Illinois and Wisconsin than the rest of the country combined. And when they had animal figures, if it was a hawk, it would be his tail feathers. If it was a turtle, it would be his tail. If it was a bear, it would be his tail. That gave you the indication of the directions. And again, when you found those effigy mounds and you were shown them the first time, you would be taught to stand and look at the effigy mound and know that Grandma's house is to the right. Uncle's house is back and to the left. Back wall, that way. You would never forget it if you came across those in a blizzard, a thunderstorm, you were lost, separated from your people. The minute you found these things, it would guide you back home. Really clever, depending on how you use them. And again, to someone else that wasn't knowledgeable in your area about them, it wouldn't hold the same meaning. So again, an advantageous thing for you and your community. This is up in Michigan. This is another double trunk example. We have them in Missouri. We have them here. We have them in 7 states. All that represented something significant in the landscape. A mineral spring, a fresh flowing spring. These are just other examples by showing that it's the Great Lakes region. This is the grandfather tree, talked about by Native Americans again, going back over a century. There were 2 of them. This is off the Tippecanoe River. I was brought there by the head of the historical department. She knew what I was doing. 2 of these trees led to an exposed copper deposit. Native Americans didn't have the ability to mine. They didn't have the tools. So whenever you found a surface deposit anywhere, it was really advantageous to mark that. And the 2 trees still are alive. I took the photo of this. This tree is just a mess. And again, still alive. And this is the type of tree that you have back in your photo with Best Done, where they simply were bending a limb in an emergency situation to give a new landmark. This is Missouri, again. This almost looks like the tree you just saw, right? That's because this one marked the land bridge on the largest river in that area. And this is a tree we refer to as Mamu, and that was leading in a line of trees that led to where you cross the river on a rock bottom. It's important to cross rivers on a rock bottom, not in the muck. And this has been heralded around so long that building developments in St. Louis are named after it. Pentry Apartments, Pentry Road. The Osage have honored it. And this was scary. You gotta remember, I'm sure you've all traveled and you've had your adventures. It's a lot more fun to have an adventure with 1 or 2 other people. When you're alone, the world is a whole different place. You are treated differently. It's much scarier. Things happen to individuals much more often. I was sent to this tree, and I'm meeting this man in a town of 300 people in the hills. And I'm told he hates people. So I'm going to meet a guy. I had no cell phone. That was another thing. I refused to have a cell phone until I finished the book. I did not know that would be 28 years. I kept my word. So I'm alone in obscure towns. I'm not talking about major cities off the interstate. There's they're scary enough. But I was going back and researching things that usually weren't trail trees, but I went through major forest fires. I'm talking on the horrendous scales. Ice storms where I was trapped in my truck. Snowstorms where we were impassable for 2-3 days. It's not that much fun when you're alone. When you're with your buddies, you make a yarn about it afterwards. It's scary when you're alone. But this tree here it just went down, literally just went down. And that tree was protected in Missouri. The foresters came out to it, the family, multi-generational, protected it. Lou was the man's name. That was the oldest member of this family. And it leads to a beautiful freshwater spring that I would drink out of today. So I got to see it, and I did make friends with the mean guy. It took a while. These are examples of, much like when you get to an intersection in a road, okay? And you see 1 or 2 signs, maybe 3, and that gives you more information in your mind. These double trunks, and this was taught to me by Kenosha, Bristol, Wisconsin, had a set of these. It gave you more information. In other words, you'd have to be taught. Everything was oral tradition. And you paid attention to what your parents said because your life depended on it. So you were told what these meant. In other words, this could mean, this way to Green Bay and the other way to Menominee or whatever. We don't know what they meant, but they passed on additional information. It's not accidental that they were shaped together. And this has reoccurred in 7 different states that documented that concept. This is on Maggie Mountain in North Carolina. Tracy is a Cherokee. This trail marker tree has had 3 plaques that have deteriorated over the last century. This was during the October 8th, my brother's birthday, when the hurricane was hitting that coast, and we were on top of Maggie Mountain being filmed for a documentary on the trail marker trees. So it's not just our area. This is my nephew, an Eagle Scout, and again, at a triple trunk, and I told you about that, indicating village sites, like ours was indicated the Bowman Village, famous Bowman Village site. That's why the DAR saved that. So I've been to this tree, investigated it with my brother, with my nephew, and I'm proud to say now that the tree has been documented by the Comanches in a formal ceremony, saying the same thing I'm saying. So that's really nice to have that confirmed. This is up in Ontario. This is leading down to a major lake separate from that tree. That tree's on the edge of the Kingsville golf course. And the people that owned that section of land before that knew about this trail marker tree. This thing is so huge it had to be shaped in the late 1600s. And the knowledge has never stopped about it. It's always been protected. People know about it, but I don't send people to trail marker trees. That never ends well. Trail trees have been destroyed. Bark has been stripped off of them as high as a person can reach. You do not send people to endangered species. I won't. Other people might. It's just nice that we know it, honor it, and certain people keep these things healthy and alive. This took years to actually accomplish. I was taught about council circles, and by that I mean living council circles shaped by trees. And that is something that's, as far as I can find, was only done in the Great Lakes region. This is on private property. I was given permission to go up there. We searched for this tree. There's a replica council circle tree in the area. This is up by Charlottewood. That is not what you're looking at here. You're looking at trees that were shaped in the early 1800s. They are all bent out at 10 feet. It's a different technique of breaking the tree. and then supporting it temporarily for a few years. So when you stand in the center of this circle, there's 8 trees. And all those branches are pointing outward to the universe. And that's pretty cool. And we know the chief that shaped it, the Chippewa chief, we know his name. And I have done replica trail marker trees, or council circles, sorry, for Winnetka and for Owen Park in Waukegan. 2 known Native American historical sites, and I've shaped those, and I've included other Native Americans with me. The one is already 9 years old, and they're to be used for ceremonies. And my theory is, as the trees grow, the knowledge of the Native Americans and the relationships between these kids and other natives that come out to do ceremonies at them, that's what I want them used for, will grow, and they'll bond. And how cool would that be to have pictures of yourself, when the trees are, 30 years old, and then go back, when you're 50, and show your kids, hey, this is me, And I did each one of these ceremonies with archeologists. Dan Malone will be here in a week or 2. This is, again, doing the first tree. The one in Winnetka has 24 trees, and half of them were grown from known acorns from living trail marker trees, which I thought was pretty cool. I did 10 other projects with traditional trees for their township, but that was the first council circle. This was the second one, and I did it with Verlin Springman, a direct descendant of Chief Alexander Robinson, who signed the Prairie du Chien Treaty. So it's really neat involving these people that have first and last names, and we know who they are, who the relatives were. This site, I won't get into it too much. I've been there 11 times. It was a direct result of some young people not being where they should be, spotted some of these trees, got a hold of me. I dropped everything after seeing some of the photographs they sent me that aren't up here. And I made my first trip to this site. I've made 11 trips since then. I brought back elders from several tribes, people from the DNR that are in the forestry development area in that zone. And what we believe they are is they're actually 2 council circles. And I won't get into it any more than that, because my next thing is to meet with the Sauk people that are in that section of Iowa and to bring them out so that this is protected. And this is an H tree. Helen Hornbach Tanner, does that ring a bell with anyone? She was credited with being the most knowledgeable person about Native Americans. In recent times, she wrote the Atlas of the Great Lakes, indicating all the maps. She defended Native Americans in legal battles about land discrepancies. I had the privilege of meeting her, actually intentionally met her. Went to one of her lectures in the 90s about trees, and I wanted to talk to her about what I was doing. She laughed, patted me on the back, and said, "It's about time someone did this, Dennis. I'd be happy to pass on some information that I know you don't have." And sure enough, what she was talking about was famous grafted trees that are usually put at portage sites. In other words, where do you get off the river that has no buildings for references, that has no signs, that has no forestry department telling you where the next portage is? And if it's flooded, it's a big mud puddle with no banks, and the water is going out into the forest for 100, 200 feet in either direction. By putting these grafted trees high enough on the bank, it's something you could not confuse with anything else. That would tell you where to get off and on the foot trail to the next part of the portage. Very significant. That sections of that tree are documented in a museum in Iowa. And again, in our area, the famous Scarf maps, if any of you are familiar with history, in our area he did some of the most important maps. Very, very well-respected man. That's actually, they were a little more artistic with their maps, obviously, in the old days. That's a grafted tree, the H. Again, so since learning about this, I have learned more about grafted trees. But she was really smart. In my book, there's a quote. She basically alludes to the fact that any field archaeologist or anthropologist that doesn't know about the trail marker trees never really went wild. And I was really happy to hear that from someone she was at the Newberry, if you're familiar with the Newberry Library in Chicago. She ended her career there, just extremely well-respected woman. We lost her a couple of years ago, but I was really glad that I've known her. This is one of the reasons, I did this slideshow presentation specifically for you guys. I went through all my presentations and tried to do something significant to us, our area, and something I felt the people here would have a better understanding of. So what we're talking about, obviously the Native Americans are out of this area. Logging companies, this is what's referred to, I'm sure there's sailors in the crowd, as knees. See that curve? If you can get that naturally in white oak is the preferred building material for ships. Everything was about ships in the 16, 17, 1800s. Everything was about getting as much white oak as you could. If you could find a trail marker tree and cut that down and put it on your horse sled, you got triple the amount of money for trail marker trees. Hence, East Coast trail marker trees are extremely rare. Where were the trail marker trees off of? The main trails. Where would they spot these trees? Off the main trail. So that's the reason for a lot. We were the Wild West, you all know that. We were the Northwest Territory. I mean, a lot of people don't understand that, but we were as far as anybody would go. We didn't cross the Mississippi. So our trees here were more protected. We were not as advanced. We couldn't get in. The only person in writing that ever objected to the concept of the trail marker trees was a man named Holtz. And it bugged me for years. Why would this guy be so adamant about his dislike about all these ceremonies that were going on with Native Americans, a block from his house? Well, it turns out he was a lumber salesman. Big surprise, eh? They were loading up boxcars. There's another reference in a book called Pioneers to Commuters. And it references them filling boxcars up with this type of shaped trees from our area, and he was part of that. They knew what they were doing. They were selling them to high-end ship yacht builders. And that goes on to this day. I've actually researched it that far. There are men to this day that are sent out all over the world to hunt down certain species of trees, and hopefully with natural bends. It's more beautiful. It's actually stronger than joining two trees. This is just something I never saw coming because I was so young when I started doing this study. The kids in Green Bay, I think, was this Earth Day, Gail?
Arbor Day.
Arbor Day. They actually shaped a replica of a Lake Forest trail marker tree out of paper mache. Their theory was that the pulp of the paper mache is from trees, and we've made a trail marker tree. And the mayor, I've done a lot of work with him up there, Mayor Schmidt, about a decade worth. He said, Dennis, would you walk in front of the kids? Their float won, the grand prize. Just really rewarding. And I've shaped trail marker trees with the Green Bay Packers at different points of entry from Joliet and Marquette. And again, this is Hilda and one of my trail marker trees. And then later in my life, I started actually doing talks to younger kids, students, high school, grade school, especially in areas that had the trail trees. If I was there already, I'd reach out, contact someone, and we'd give a talk to the kids. And again, to have, and I always, at the end of my talks, would emphasize to these kids in the known areas of fur trade, their relatives might have worked hand in hand with the Native Americans. and been intermarried and friendly with them. And that, the kids' eyes just light up, you know, and to actually see little Native American Indians cry about learning about something, it's impactful. And the teachers really appreciate it. I believe in this, together, not arguing, separating, and pointing fingers. Nobody knew everything and how it would turn out. Again, this is a sculpture. I did the sculpture at the request of Harry Spells, the famous foundry owner on the Rock River, Arkansas, Illinois. He's done the Lewis and Clark sculptures, Mother Teresa, Michael Jordan, Clark, you name it. He's done it. Great man, 4 degrees. He casted the first bronze trail shoe of mine, 24 inches. We became fast friends after that. He's a historian as well. That tree was entered, this is an actual sculpture of mine. And it was in the 2003 larger-than-life sculpting competition in Peoria, Illinois. Rutherford's put that on. The park was designed by Marlon Perkins of Mutual of Omaha. Beautiful park. It won. I was on a research trip in Canada. I got the news. I started buying drinks because it was a $60,000 prize towards the purchase of the piece to be permanently put there. Mr. Rutherford died by the time I got home. His children would not honor the award. And I was not going to sue about something significant to me. I didn't want to go that way. Now that tree is permanently installed on the grounds of the Grove and has been honored by 8 Native Americans participated in the installation and blessing. It's permanently on the ground of the Grove where there were no trail marker trees forming a portage. This is it, part of it. This is Andrew and Hilda. I believe that was on the day of the ceremony. Again, we had 400 people turn out for that event, and it was miserable, and they stayed till the end and longer. That's Hilda. This is a bronze. This now marks the McGuanago Trail. You would call it Highway 83, leading further up north to a non-native village. Again, documented. So the village of Antioch purchased the 5-foot bronze, and it's permanently in their little Victory Garden right on Main Street. And Native Americans go there with or without me and actually kick off Native American Month before you guys are doing it here in your village, which is really nice. It was a great event. They blocked Highway 83. We had for that event, I think it was 273 people. Rain, 25-mile-an-hour wind, and we had people wall to wall for the entire 4 hours from the beginning to end. This I was very happy about. After decades of working with the DAR, doing talks for different chapters all over the Midwest region, they asked me to do a national presentation. I was supposed to speak at Congressional Hall during COVID. And COVID screwed up my personal appearance. Sponsored by the American Indian Committee of the DAR, which hardly anybody knows about. It is also over 100 years old. Technically, it was concept was 1924. It was verified in 34, 35. They have done countless things for the American Indian community that they never get recognized for. And have them choose me to give a national presentation, 18 minutes. I did a special talk for them, and it aired to 3,000 chapters and 186,000 members. This is in Texas, again marking a famous spring, and Professor Jansen from here at Northwestern, that was the furthest west he went for his research. So basically, I think this is one of the trees he would have been to back in the day. I can't prove that part, but I'm pretty sure it was one of them. And again, this is just how Native Americans think about what I do. It's always nice to have other people's opinions. I'd like to donate this book to your center. I signed it. The regular book is sold out, but I'd like to donate this to your group and have it there for you people.